What's happening, everybody? It's Sean with Reactions to the Classics. And today we got a reaction to Van Morrison and his classic Astral Weeks. This is brought to us by the Patreon community. I give them 2 albums to choose from every month. They pick, and then I record it for Patreon. So if you're watching on Patreon, you already know all this. If you're watching on YouTube, I recorded this a few months ago. It stays exclusive to Patreon. So if you like, and I'd greatly appreciate it, check out that Patreon link below or the Patreon link that'll show up on your end screen. Check it out. We got free trials going on. You can just see what it's all about. Great community over there. We do a lot of cool stuff for you. So they chose this. So I'll tell you that I gave them a choice between Moondance and Astral Weeks because we've done neither one of these Van Morrison classics. We've done a lot of Van Morrison. Type Van Morrison in that bar above. You're going to see it. We got over 3,000 videos. You can check it out. But we've never done either one of these classic albums. Now, full disclosure, I put first time hearing on the description. I've actually heard this album once, but Trey and I, my partner on this channel, back in 2022, went back and we picked our top 10 albums from every single year, 1965 up to current times. We just put up 2024 recently. And in that journey, I listened to these albums. But what I did is I listened to 35 to 40 albums from every single year. So it went quick. And I heard Moondance, and I remember I liked it. And I heard this, and I'm like, I don't get this at all. Everybody else gets this. It's considered one of the greatest albums of all time. But I just didn't get it. So I'm curious, now that I've researched it, I don't feel so bad about not getting it because most people don't get it on first listen. There's a lot to this album. So I'm going to like to think that with all the listening I do and reactions I do, that my taste is getting more refined and sophisticated by the minute, boys and girls. So we'll see if I enjoy this more. But let's talk about the background of this, which has got one of the most interesting stories that I have come across. And I come across a lot of interesting stories because I do all the research. All right, this is his second studio album recorded at Century Sound Studios in New York during September and October 1968, released in November of the same year by Warner Brothers Records. They got after it back then. It blends folk, blues, jazz, and classical styles, signaling a radical departure from the sound of Morrison's previous pop hits, such as Brown Eyed Girl back in 1967. And I'll pause for a second to let you know, Brown Eyed Girl, I was blown away. It has almost 1.3 billion streams with a beat. That's insane. I'll tell you why it's insane. Not because it's an all-time classic song. When you come across older songs that have 1 billion streams, it's always mind-blowing. Here's why. Obviously, there's no Spotify when this song came out. There was no Spotify for 40 years, really, since the song came out. So for it to, on the streaming world, for a song to get towards that billion without it being newly released, it's a very difficult thing to do. So anyway, it's just impressive. The lyrics have been described as impressionistic, hypnotic, and modernist, while the record's been categorized as a song cycle or concept album. More on that in a minute. Okay, here comes that interesting story that I teased at the beginning. And I'm going to summarize. I'm going to read a little bit, but I'm going to summarize it because I've read a ton of different stuff on this. At the beginning of 1968, Van became involved in a contract dispute with Bang Records that kept him away from any recording activity. This occurred after the sudden death of the label's founder, Burt Burns. Prior to Burns' death, he and Morrison experienced some creative difficulties. Burns had been pushing Van in a more pop-oriented direction, while Van wanted to explore newer musical terrain. Burns' widow, Eileen Burns, held Morrison in this conflict responsible for her husband's death. Years later, she would downplay the scenario, but Morrison's then-girlfriend, Janet Rigsby, has since gone on record describing Eileen's subsequent vindictiveness towards Morrison. Following his death, Eileen inherited the contracts of Bang Records. Morrison's annual option on his recording contract was also due less than a week after Burns' funeral. Legally bound to Bang Records, Morrison was not only kept out of the studio, but also found himself unable to find work performing in New York as most clubs refrained from booking him, fearing reprisals. Not just from the record company. I'll get to that in a second. Burt Burns was notorious for his connections to organized crime, and those connections still affected artists like Morrison and, I did a dive on this too, I had no idea, Neil Diamond trying to leave Bang Records even after Burns' death. Eileen then discovered that her late husband had previously been remiss in filing the appropriate paperwork to keep Morrison still a British citizen in New York and contracted Immigration and Naturalization Service in an attempt to have him deported. However, he managed to stay in the U.S. when Janet Rigby agreed to marry him. Now, that's what Wiki's going to tell you, but I read I don't know how many things I read on this because it became fascinating. So Burns had died of a heart attack, and that's why Eileen blamed him. But while Eileen inherited officially, there was actually a guy named Carmine Wassel Denoya, who was a mobster friend, who was actually running the record label from most of what you read. And one night, him and Van got into it, and he broke an acoustic guitar over Van's head. So Van and Janet get married. He escapes to Boston because no one in New York or Ohio wants to get away from the mobs. He starts playing these little clubs where a Warner Brothers executive named Joe Smith, who'd seen him perform in Boston, bought his Bang Records contract from the mob with a bag full of cash. Now, the way he brokered this deal, Joe Smith, the Warner Brothers record label guy, is he found the manager of Don Rickles, the epic comedian Don Rickles. And that manager, I'm not going to say Don did too, had ties to organized crime. And he knew Carmine. So he arranged a meeting. He took $20,000 of cash. Now, mind you, that's a lot of money now. It was an insane amount of money there. Handed it to Carmine and got out of there with Don Rickles as manager, broker, and the deal. And that's how Van got out of his record contract. It's very, it's a very interesting story if you want to dive deeper on. I digress, but very seldom do I come across someone like, damn, that's crazy. So that was crazy. So once Van moved to Massachusetts and Cambridge, he began performing with the Small Electric Combo, doing blues numbers and songs from Blowing Your Mind and from Morrison's Them band days. Two of the musicians soon left, but Morrison retained the bassist Tom Kilbania, a student at the Berklee School of Music. Morrison decided to try an acoustic sound, and he and Kilbania began performing shows in coffee houses in the Boston area as an acoustic duo with Morrison playing guitar and Kilbania on upright bass. I've never seen that name in my life. Before this, Van had primarily recorded and performed with electric musicians. The acoustic medium would provide him with, quote, greater vocal improvisation and a freer, folkier feel, is what he said. Later, Kilbania heard jazz-trained flautist John Payne for the first time while sitting in on a jam session. He invited Payne to the club where he played with Van, hoping Van would invite him to join them. After allowing Payne to sit in on one performance, Morrison extended an invitation, which Payne accepted. The trio of Payne, Kilbania, and Morrison continued performing for 4 months. In the weeks they played at the Catacombs, they began to develop the template for Astral Weeks. It was around this time that Warner Brothers approached him, hoping to sign him. Presumably, their interest focused on prior success with Brown Eyed Girl, not on what he was doing currently. Regardless, it allowed him to return to the studio after the $20,000 payout. At the time, Warner Brothers had a deal with Inherit Productions, the production arm of Schwade Merenstein, which was founded by manager Bob Schwade. Jeez, I don't know. It's a weird name, too. Usually it's foreign names. It's trivia. Who worked for Warner's publisher and producer Louis Merenstein. Merenstein received a call from Warner Bros. To see Morrison in Boston and related how 8 or 9 producers had gone to hear Morrison, thinking they were going to hear Brown Eyed Girl, only to find out, quote, it was another person with the same voice, because they're expecting this, think it's something totally different. All this is important, guys. I'm telling you about this because this is what frames what Van becomes, right? How he becomes Van the Man. He didn't stay in that realm of, commercially always sounding music, and this is how he got away from it. Merenstein first heard Morrison play at Ace Recording Studio and recalled that when Morrison played the song Astral Weeks for him, I started crying. It just vibrated in my soul, and I knew he wanted to work with that sound. While Merenstein was visiting Morrison, Schwade set to work on resolving Morrison's contractual troubles with Joe Smith, which I already covered. Now, it wasn't just the $20,000 of cash. Van had to do some other stuff, which was painful. Schwade managed to free him from his obligations under several conditions. First, Morrison had to write and submit to Web4 Music, Burt Burns' publishing company, 3 original compositions per month over the course of 1 year. Look, guys, if you know anything about the music business, half the money is in the publishing, literally half of it. So Morrison fulfilled the obligation by recording 36 nonsense songs in a single session. Now, let's remember here, he's really dealing with the mob, let's be honest. It's kind of a dicey thing to do, Van, but it worked for him. Morrison then had to assign Web4 half of the copyright to any musical composition written, recorded by Morrison, and released as a single within 1 year from September 12, 1968. Now, how do you solve that? Yeah, they didn't release any singles at all. So there was no singles released from this album. Finally, he had to include 2 original compositions controlled by Web4 on his next album. Now, he did do that on here. The songs were Madame George and Beside You, although the versions subsequently released were vastly different musically from the original versions recorded with Bang. Once he gets those resolved, he had the freedom to proceed with recording how he wanted to. The live tracks for the session were performed by Morrison on vocals and acoustic in a separate vocal booth with the other musicians playing together on upright bass, lead guitar, vibes, flute, and drums. The strings and horns constitute the only instruments added after the initial recording. Morrison said later, quote, they ruined it. They added strings. I didn't want the strings, and they sent it to me. It was all changed. That's not Astral Weeks. Now, interesting stories from the studio. A lot of these guys said he never actually spoke to them. He didn't speak to them. He went in there. He did their thing. They did theirs. But he did go in and play the songs originally for him once. He just didn't really speak to him. He did tell him, you guys do what you want with it. So the musicians, although they didn't have any relationship with him that were playing on the album, were very happy because Van gave them so much freedom to do whatever they wanted to. And that's what gives this album its sound, supposedly. Van said in 2009, you have to understand something. A lot of this, there was no choice. I was totally broke. So I didn't have time to sit around pondering or thinking all this through. It was just done on a basic pure survivor level. I did what I had to do. And in that, most of these were 1 or 2 takes. That was it. Now, here's what some people say. Although usually described as a song cycle rather than a concept album, the songs do, when considered in their totality, seem to link together as one long song, forming an intangible narrative of unreachable world, and delivered with what one writer calls a masterpiece of virtuoso singing. The album embraces a form of symbolism that would eventually become a staple of Van's songs, equating earthly love and heaven, or as close as a living being can approach it. Morrison and Davis's upright bass can be interpreted as the earth-opposing K's percussion and the string arrangements representing heaven, and with Berliner's lead acoustic guitar residing on a plane in between. Look, that's what several things said. Van hasn't said that, guys. Sometimes we take stuff to another level. But I mean, maybe that's right. I promise you I wasn't going to listen to this album and come up with that, so I just thought I'd share it with you. In an interview with Pace in 2009, Van said the songs on Astral Weeks were written, quote, prior to 1968 over a period of 5 years. He comments, it's not about me. It's totally fictional. It's put together of composites of conversations I heard, things I saw in movies, newspapers, books, whatever. It came out as stories. That's it. There's no more. It's not about him. The packaging is important because that's how we get our name. According to Steve Turner, one of Van's biographers, Irish painter Cecil McCartney, nice last name, influenced the title of Astral Weeks. Morrison related how, quote, a friend of mine had drawings in his flat of astral projection. I was at his house when I was working on a song which began, if I had ventured down the slipstream, and that's why I called it Astral Weeks. It was a painting. McCartney says there were several paintings in the studio at the time. Van looked at the painting and it suggested astral traveling to him. Okay, this album's one of those interesting ones. It's very similar to an album released 2 years prior, the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, that's become iconic. But this album did not sell well at all. I mean, there's no singles, right? So it didn't sell well at all, and the critics hated it for the most part. Now, Rolling Stone, I know some of you guys hate on Rolling Stone, named it the album of the year. Retrospectively, Pitchfork's given it a 10 out of 10. A lot of things, it's changed. But now this one caught my attention. Astral Weeks influenced future releases of other musicians, such as Bono and Bruce Springsteen. Supposedly, Astral Weeks influenced Bruce's 1973 first album, of course, Greetings from Asbury Park, New Jersey, and 2 of the songs from his second. Stephen Van Zandt, Little Stevie, in Bruce's band, in the East Street Band, has said Astral Weeks was like a religion to us. And according to Grill Marcus, Martin Scorsese said that the first 15 minutes of his epic 1976 film Taxi Driver was based on Astral Weeks. Now I got to listen to this album, and I'm seriously going to go watch the first 15 minutes of that movie, which is just stone cold classic, and see if I could see that. Van said in 79, Astral Weeks did not sell as an album, even still today. No, that was 79. I mean, it still hasn't really sold much. A lot of people like it, mostly musicians and other artists and writers like it. But as an album, it didn't sell. Now, Van retrospectively didn't like all of the praise this album got because he felt like he could never rise above it. When the artist has that masterpiece album, then everything you do is compared to that and nothing can match up to it. And I think that frustrates artists, and I think it should, because it's like, look, man, I know this is a masterpiece over here, but I'm doing all this stuff. So I don't know, because he's even given a little criticism of this album, but I think it's probably just because he's tired of hearing about it. But okay, I know there's a long intro, but I mean, this album's important, guys, and it's important that you understand it, I understand it. So anyway, if you haven't been to this before, the music won't be in the video, but it'll be a Vimeo link below. All tracks, of course, are written by Van. Let's kick it off with the first track, the title track, Astral Weeks. On the first recording session, I didn't share, there were only 3 recording sessions for this album. This song was the last of 4 recorded for that date. John Payne, the flutist who had been working with Van, said it was the first time he had ever heard it, and that although the song may sound rehearsed, it was actually captured from the only take. Van described it as being, quote, like transforming energy or going from one source to another, with it being born again like a rebirth. I remember reading about you having to die to be born. It's one of those songs where you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And that's basically what the song says. All right, man, I'm going to have these lyrics up and let's jump into it. Thanks again to the patrons. All right, the title track, Astral Weeks. I'd already decided going into this, but I mean, I read all the lyrics as it was going along, but I was also vibing with it, that I'm not really going to try to break down the lyrics too much because they are abstract, they're impressionist, and they're kind of what you want them to be. And you have to really listen to it a lot to try to kind of figure out what you think. So normally I kind of break them down for you, my impression, but I'm probably going to leave them alone for the most part because I do have some quotes from Van on a lot of them about the song. But what I want to comment on is how beautiful the song was. It shows you how, quote, limited instrumentation can just be gorgeous. Now, Van's on the acoustic. Jay Berlinger is on classical guitar. Richard Davis on that double bass. John Payne on the flute, which is subtle. And I think that's why it works. And then percussion and vibraphone, Warren Smith Jr. and Larry Fallon on the strings. It's just a gorgeous song. I mean, now that I'm familiar with so much of Van's work, like, it's a Van song, man. It's an early Van song. I can hear it. But that was really good. There's only 8 songs, so I really liked one of them already. Let's go to the second track, Beside You. Van remarked on the song, he said, Beside You is the kind of song that you'd sing to a kid or somebody you love. It's basically a love song, just a song about being spiritually beside somebody. The child that would have inspired the song was his adopted son by Janet, his wife at the time. It is sung with a, quote, hushed wonder, and in it, Van transfers the visions of his own childhood to his son. So we will check this out. All right, I'm not ranking the songs. I don't like that as well as I like Astral Weeks, but Van's vocal performance was better than it was in Astral Weeks. Not that it was bad in Astral Weeks. Astral Weeks just didn't call for this. I mean, really, there's a little bit of flute in there, but really, I mean, this song is really all about Van and Jay Berlinger, who's doing that classical guitar throughout. Classical guitar that almost sounds like a flamenco guitar towards the end there a little bit, kind of vacillates in there. And I mean, Richard Davis is on double bass. And Warren Smith Jr. is on that vibraphone, which is real subtle in there. But yeah, man. And this song does have more of a story to it. It's kind of collections of, like these images and things going on. It was still really good. All right, next up we have Sweet Thing, written by Van when he was 22 or 23 after he'd met his future wife, Janet, which we're talking about. Well, he was on tour in 1966 in the U.S. during the year of separation after he returned to Belfast. So he had met her in 66. He's back in Belfast, and he writes this song. It's the only song on the album, interestingly enough, that looks forward instead of backwards. He stated that the song is another romantic song. It contemplates gardens and things like that, wet with rain. It's a romantic love ballad. Not about anybody in particular, but about a feeling. I don't know, man. Artists say later on, it's not about what it really was about just because they want to be protective of it or for various reasons. But the Great Waterboys did a cover of this on the fantastic album from 1988, Fisherman's Blues. All right, Sweet Thing. That was a beautiful song. And its lyricism is outstanding. Verse 2, and I shall drive my chariot down your streets and cry. Well, it's me. I'm dynamite, and I don't know why. You shall take me strongly in your arms again, and I wonder if I might remember that I ever felt the pain. We shall walk, in the pre-chorus, we shall walk and talk in gardens all misty wet with rain down, and I will never, never, never grow so old again. It's a beautifully written song. Instrumentation was fantastic. The only thing I'll say, and this is not a knock on the song, I really like this song. The flute by John Payne, it was really good. I thought it was a little bit too much. It almost took away just a little bit from this beautiful arrangement, but it's a fantastic song. All right, we're going to wrap up the first side. I should have told you the first side is called In the Beginning. Cypress Avenue. It refers to Cypress Avenue, a residential street in Van's hometown of Belfast, Northern Ireland. In performance, the song was a concert highlight and closer for years. It would end with Morrison's command, "It's too late to stop now," which is a quotation, of course, from Into the Mystic, which is such a good song. Built on a blues structure with an unusual arrangement, the strings and harpsichord were overdubbed a month later. According to Roy Kane, who grew up with Morrison in Belfast, Cypress Avenue, quote, was a street that we would all aspire to. The other side of the tracks, the Beersbridge Road, had the railway line cut across it. And on our side of it was one side of the tracks, and Cypress Avenue was the other. There's an Italian shop up in Ballyhackamore, and that's where all the young ones used to go on a Sunday. We used to walk up to the Skybeam for an ice cream or a cup of mushy peas and vinegar. Man, guys, we eat different here in the U.S. We used to take a shortcut up Cypress Hill. And Morrison told biographer Richie York, along with Madam George, which refers to Cypress Avenue in the opening line, we're going to get to that. The song came to him in, quote, a stream of consciousness thing. But those songs just came right out. I didn't even think about what I was writing. All right, let's finish off side one. Okay, Cypress Avenue, a fantastic kind of epic song. Instrumentation was great. Double bass from Richard Davis was really on point there, but Van just took you there, man. And he said in a book that this was like the rich part of town, like I was alluding to earlier, and that he went there to think. It helped him think. So what an epic way to finish out side one, which I don't want to give away things, but I super enjoyed. Now remember, side one was called part one in the beginning. This is part two afterwards on side two. We got The Way Young Lovers Do. And Richie York's biography on Van, he comments that Van told him, quote, on the second side, Young Lovers Do, which is basically a song about young love. And then Morrison then laughed mysteriously. All right, let's go. All right, The Way Young Lovers Do. A different kind of song, has some jazz elements to it, but it's very disjointed. I mean, that's the way they designed it to be. In the arrangement, it's definitely just about young lovers. The lyrics are pretty straightforward, especially for this album. I didn't really like it, but I think this one's going to take multiple listens. It's just very uneasy, and I know that's the way it's designed to be, but I mean, I just give you guys this is a true channel, right? Some people like it, some people don't, but we'll see. That one might grow on me. All right, now we're going to go to a song that Trey and I did a song reaction to years ago, and I didn't really like it. Madam George, the main theme of the song is pretty contentious, right? Some believe it's about leaving the past behind. The character of Madam George is considered by many to be a drag queen, although Morrison himself denied that in a Rolling Stone interview. He later claimed that the character was based on 6 or 7 different people, which is kind of what he said about the album, right? It's a composite of people. He said it's like a movie, a sketch, or short story. In fact, most of the songs in Astral Weeks are like short stories in terms of what they mean. There's baffling to me as to anyone else. I haven't got a clue what that song is about or who Madam George might have been. So just remember that when you're trying to break all this down. Van doesn't even know. And when he was speaking to that biographer, I was talking about Richie York, about the writing and meaning of the song. He said it was recorded live. The vocal was live and rhythm section, the flute too, and the strings were the only overdub. The title of the song confuses me. I must say the original title was Madam Joy, but the way I wrote it down was Madam George. Don't ask me why I do this, because I just don't know. The song is just a stream of consciousness thing, as is Cypress Avenue, which we talked about. It just came right out. It's basically about a spiritual feeling. The song contains a number of references to places and events in Van's native Belfast. Cypress Avenue, which I mentioned earlier. We also have throwing pennies at the bridges down below is a practice of Northern Irish Unionists. They traveled on the train from Dublin to Belfast, where the train crossed the River Boyne. The train from Dublin arrived in Belfast at one end of Sandy Row, a working-class, staunchly Unionist Protestant street and neighborhood. Fitzroy may be a reference to Fitzroy Avenue, a narrow residential street in Belfast. In 1974, after he recorded 8 albums, remember this is his second, he told Richie York, when he asked him what he considered his finest single track and the one he enjoyed the most, it was definitely Madam George, definitely. I'm just starting to realize it more and more. It just seems to get at you. Just lays right in there. That whole track, the vocals and the instruments and the whole thing. I like that. And a very famous modern day singer-songwriter, Harry Styles, says this is his one of his favorite songs and that this album is his favorite album. All right, this album has a lot of long songs. This one's almost 10 minutes long. When this album won the Patreon poll, this thing was hanging over me. Much Ado About Nothing. I didn't really like it last time. I mean, I see it's a brilliant song. It's not my favorite song of his, but it's a brilliant song. It's about as far away from Brown Eyed Girl as you can get, but it's literally epic. That word is overused, but it's literally epic. And I can see how it's a stream of consciousness. I wouldn't begin to try to break down these lyrics, and neither would he. But he's on the acoustic, Richard Davis on double bass, Connie Kay on drums, Payne's back on the flute, but Larry Fallon and the string arrangements are what makes this song. This song has all this time to breathe. It goes in and out of just on these little runs, and he's in full Van mode singing. I mean, so it's a good song. All right, we got 2 songs left. We got Ballerina. He wrote it upon first meeting Janet when touring the U.S. with his band Them in June 1966. Them guitarist Jim Armstrong remembers rehearsing and playing the song for the first time in the Waikiki Shell in Hawaii. He commented to Rich York, again, the biographist, I was in San Francisco one time in 1966, and I was attracted to the city. It's the first time I'd been there, and I was sitting in this hotel, and all these things were going through my head, and I had a flash about an actress in an opera house appearing in a ballet. And I think that's where the song came from. All right, Ballerina, another epic 7-minute song. Simple chord progression on this. I mean, I don't know if it's Van's best vocal performance on here because they're all great, but quite the vocal performance on this one, switching up the emotion. Like, I thought the vibraphone by Warren Smith Jr. was just on point, man, but there might have been a little bit too much. Like, I didn't love this arrangement. I didn't dislike it. It distracted just a slight bit from the vocal performance, but it was really well done. The double bass was on, but another really just epic song. And we have done it. Come to the last track, Slim Slow Slider. Say that fast 10 times. In Van's words, the subject of the song is, quote, a person who's caught up in a big city like London or maybe is on dope. Brian Hinton describes it as being an intrusion between the two poles of Belfast and America in the other songs. The craziness of Cypress Avenue has come home, so that the streets of Notting Hill become some sandy beach in the junkie's eyes. We are back in the world of TV sheets and a 12 bars blues, and Van's chuckle is truly nasty. After all those rebirths, here's a song about winter, white as snow and death. And then the song is going to end abruptly, just so you know what it is, with Van slapping on the side of his guitar because he's playing acoustic on this, as on most of these songs. All right, let's go. All right, Slim Slow Rider. Great dial back arrangement. It's mainly, there's a little double bass. It's mainly Van's acoustic, and then John Payne on soprano saxophone. This is the only song in here that doesn't have strings overdub, and I quite enjoyed it. I wish I could listen to stripped down versions. They're probably out there somewhere. I know you guys will let me know of the other songs without the added strings. It might even be better. I don't know. The strings are great, but they might even be better. But really good song. I mean, I think it's about somebody dying from drug abuse, but I don't know. Slim Slow Slider, Horse You Ride as White as Snow. That could be heroin, but who knows? And then the last verse, I know you're dying, baby, and I know you know it too. Every time I see you, I just don't know what to do. So, I mean, is she a drug addict? I could be really reading something into this. It's not there. I told you I wasn't going to interpret the lyrics. I almost broke my own rule there. Well, I mean, I did, but all right. Now let's go to my favorite tracks. There's only 8 tracks on here. Faves are going to be Ballerina, Madam George, Cypress Avenue, Sweet Thing, and Astral Weeks. I liked every song except for one, The Way Young Lovers Do, and Maybe They'll Grow on Me. It really seems out of place on this album. It's smack dab in the middle, and maybe that's why it didn't hit for me. But, this is an awesome album. Now we're going to get to my overall score. I told you I listened to it once a little while back in 2022, but I listened to it on several other albums, all in a row, and I just didn't get it. I think I'm getting it. This is a fantastic album. I'm not going to go back and listen to this on repeat. Hey, I'm always honest. But this album's a 9.0, and I don't give out. I've been giving out some 9s lately or close to it on these Patreon reactions for the patrons because these are just unbelievable albums. But I'm going to be at a 9.0, so let me know what you think of this down below. What do you think his best album is? Is this, Moondance, something else? I don't know. Hopefully I'll do Moondance in the future. Thanks again to the patrons for bringing this in. A reminder, click on that Patreon link down below or on the end screen, man, and come check it out. All right, guys, if you haven't already, give it a thumbs up, hit that big red subscribe button. Until next time, guys, I will see you.